Hello, welcome back. My name's Andy. So in my last video, old James put up a question about heat treatment of steel. So today we're going to go over a really basic introduction to heat treatment and how it all works. So let's get cracking. Okay guys, so these are the 3 steps to heat treating a piece of steel. You have annealing, which is where you heat the piece of steel up so that it is a nice red heat, and then you allow it to cool as slowly as possible. You've seen me do this in the chisel and punch making videos. Hardening is where you quench the steel, the hot steel I should say, in a quenching medium, so that's either water or oil or in some cases like brine, things like that. And then finally you have tempering, which is where you heat the steel back up again, but to a relatively low temperature, so like 200 degrees centigrade or something around that kind of mark depending on the steel. That relaxes the steel and takes out some of the hardness and gives it a bit of toughness. Okay, for heat treatment in general, you're effectively playing off hardness versus toughness. That goes for everything, for like blade making, for axes, for chisels, for punches, everything. Everything is a trade-off between hardness and toughness. So different applications you want it to be slightly tougher, and other applications you want things to be slightly harder. So you probably want the edge of a knife, for example, to be harder than the edge of, say, a screwdriver. You want a lot more toughness in the screwdriver than you want hardness. So all of this gets quite complicated. We're just going to go over the very basics today. So I'm not going to go into austenite and all that kind of stuff. It's just going to be a very basic overview of how this works and achieving stuff and so on and so forth. So let's explain hardness and toughness, shall we? Okay, so we're now going to go over hardness and toughness. As I said before, this is like seriously basic, so just bear with me. Pretend for a minute that we're not talking about steel, and we are in fact talking about candy. Bear with me. Okay guys, so I told you you'd have to bear with me on this one. We've got a Fox's Fruit Glacier hard candy. The equivalent over in the States would be something like a Jolly Rancher hard candy. So very hard, and this is just a piece of fudge, so just regular fudge. So these are a really good analogy for the states of steel. You've got hardness and toughness, and they behave roughly the same as a piece of steel when struck with a hammer. So if I find my little toffee hammer here. Now, I appreciate that this is very basic, and it is a very simple version of what's actually going on in steel and in real life, if you like, but it just kind of serves to kind of explain things relatively well. Okay guys, so there you go, that's just exploded everywhere. The candy is so hard that it is incredibly brittle, and it's just cracked and fractured and gone everywhere. Now this is effectively what would happen in a piece of steel that's too hard. Old James was asking me about this in the comments in a previous video. He'd made a chisel that was he'd hardened, and it obviously was just a little bit too hard, and it just shattered and went everywhere when he hit it. So let's look at the fudge and see what happens there. Okay, so there you go. So I've hit it with the same amount of force, It's stayed in one piece, there's no cracks, no fractures or anything like that. That's where the toughness comes into play, so it retains a certain amount of hardness. It's still obviously quite firm, however you've got that toughness in order to resist blows, or in terms of like knives for example, you'll take a good edge in it and it won't fracture or crack on the edge and things like that. So you want that toughness in the steel for a number of things, but that's just a very, very quick analogy, just to kind of explain what's happening and how it works. Obviously I appreciate that it is very, very basic and that things are a little bit more complicated than that in real life, as it were, but that just serves to explain hardness versus toughness. So yeah. Okay guys, so that's just a simple explanation of hardness versus toughness. Now that might explain why when you make a punch and things like that, you want it to be at the tough end of the scale rather than the hard end of the scale, so that it doesn't just explode and shatter when you hit it. You want it to retain that toughness and be able to withstand your blows and things like that. So in the past, when you've seen me make a punch, I've used spring steel and I've just annealed it so that that steel is effectively as soft as it can be. Now I say soft, it's still going to be a lot. Sorry, the wind is opening my door there. It's still going to be a lot tougher than hot mild steel, so it's going to be able to withstand all the blows and things like that, but it's still going to be tougher than the mild steel, so the mild steel will give way to the punch effectively. Okay guys, so if you were to look at a piece of steel under a microscope, you'd see that it has a crystal structure. Now I'm just going to use bolts here, or nuts here, to kind of represent things, but if you were to anneal a piece of steel, the crystals in it are allowed to, because they cool very, very slowly, they're allowed to grow quite large. Now the opposite is true when you harden the piece of steel. So when you get it hot and quench it, it cools very, very quickly, so the crystals become very, very small. That's what allows you to take a very fine edge on a blade, for example. So if these are our crystals, and this is a very, very soft piece of steel, the things are very large and they're quite spread out. When you quench it, everything becomes very, very tight. And all the crystals are very small, and it all goes in next to each other. And suddenly you've got a very compact, very hard piece of steel. Now that's probably the best way that I could think of to kind of explain it. So you've gone from very big crystals to very small crystals, and everything becomes quite compact. Okay, so if we move on to the third part of the heat treatment process, which is tempering. Now tempering just effectively just relaxes the steel. It nudges the steel back towards the tough end of the scale and takes away some of the excess hardness, so that when you go to use it, it's not just going to snap or fracture or anything like that. It's just makes it that little bit more tough. Now, many of you will have seen the tempering colours. Now this is an oxide layer which forms on the outside of the steel when you heat it back up. It kind of starts at a very light kind of yellowy colour, and then it moves all the way down to like a blue, and then once it goes past the blue it effectively goes black, and that's where you've taken it too far and it anneals the steel. So for a blade, for example, you generally go for a sort of a straw yellowy colour. That seems to be about the norm, and then you can move it down to like a dark yellow, a brown, a purpley, and then a blue. Springs, for example, tend to be tempered more to the blue end of the scale. The colours are a very, very rough guide. If you want something accurate, you need to make sure that your temperature is spot on, and your timing and so on and so forth, that you can triple anneal. Again, it all gets very complicated. I'm just trying to cover the very basics. So yeah, that's about it, I think. Cheers guys. So there we go, that's a very, very basic overview of the heat treatment process. As I say, just a basic overview, just to kind of give you an idea of how it works. I know in reality it's a lot more complicated than that. There's obviously different steels, different quenching mediums, and different tempering temperatures, and all that sort of thing. But it's just to give you an idea of how it kind of works and just better understand the process. So I am far more active on social media than I am on YouTube. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. I'll put links below. You should follow me there if you haven't already. If you've liked the video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. That'd be great. I'll put a link up here to subscribe, and over here I'll put a link to the bottle opener forging video that I did a couple of weeks ago. You should go and check that out if you haven't seen it already. I announced a 1,000 subscriber giveaway competition. All the details are in that video over there, so go and click that and have a look. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take it easy. Bye.